Hey everyone, what you're about to hear is an interview with me and Mary Byler, who is the author of the book Reflections and Memories of an Amish Misfit. My therapist says that's not true, but I digress. Came on to do an interview with us.
And who are you, Fallon? Sorry, just in case you're new here.
Sorry, Fallon Morey.
And I'm Ashley Love Richards, and I wasn't at the interview because I'm working on a separate interview segment that's about unfucking your mental health. Watch out for that, you guys. Fallon is figuratively, but literally doing the heavy lifting interview-wise right now.
Yeah, I'm just doing a lot of the book-based ones and the non-mental health specific based ones.
And a lot of them happen to be on pretty heavy topics. So kudos to you.
True. And we just wanted to record this little correction. I had the chance to speak to Mary after our interview, and they cleared some things up for me that may be misconceptions some people have about the Amish.
So if you listened to the Amish episode already, awesome. Here are some little updates. If you have not, you should totally do so because it will really enhance the experience of this interview if you have a deeper knowledge.
And we actually touch on a little bit of Mary's story specifically at the end of the first episode on the Amish that we released.
So it all goes together. It's a whole thing, you know?
It's a puzzle.
You gotta do both. So yeah, Fallon, tell them what did Mary let us know?
Right. So in the episode, you're going to hear Ash and I talk a little bit about Amish versus Mennonites. And a couple of times we discuss whether we're talking about Amish or sort of Mennonites as the same group, one just being less strict than the other. But Mary let us know that the Amish actually came from the Mennonites way prior to the groups coming to the U.S. in 1693. This point is when the Amish split from the Mennonites, and oral history that Mary was taught included a narrative that basically said the two groups split over Mennonites not practicing the shunning policy, which is the policy of completely kicking a person out of, the religion, the group, the everything. So It's not like a case of Amish and Mennonite being the same, but just less strict. So they're two separate groups. And in fact, there are many big splits in the U.S. that have Amish and Mennonite founders. Some even call themselves Amish Mennonites as one term.
Just to confuse people.
Right. And so there are a number of groups with each has their own distinctive cultural norms. So these groups are the Mennonites, the Amish Mennonites, the Hutterites, the Quakers, and the Brethren. And then underneath each of those umbrella terms are a variety of different cultural norms for various denominations within those subcultures. So a very different group for each one of those, essentially.
Well, thank you for helping clear that up, Mary, because that is...
We would never have known without that knowledge.
Yeah, it's a lot, and we're glad to know, for sure.
And then one more quick correction is that we had sort of said that, the Amish discipline their children according to the book To Train Up a Child by Michael Pearl. But in actuality, Michael Pearl has bragged about using Amish ideals and methods as inspirations for his book. So I think it's more like their ways came first and he sort of took inspiration from that for what he then taught later. So
that book is my face.
Oh, I know. That book is a big old yuck. But we just wanted to make those corrections.
That's like worse. But
yes.
Fuck. Yikes. That's all. That's our little Amish update, and enjoy the episode.
Oh, also so many levels to unpack. I've never felt like talking about apples has made me feel so dirty before. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just waiting for my kids to go into the grocery store with me and pick up a piece of fruit and be like, don't touch that. No lusting. You can eat it in the car.
Oh my.
That's safe.
That is so fucked up. It's fucked up. So fucked up. It is just so damn fucked up. That's fucked up.
David Breedon Schwestern, alle Waschen, steht Zimmer doofe Sommer, immer was mir so kennest, what it is.
And that was awesome. And that, my friends, was our guest for today, Mary Byler. And you were doing what just now? What were you telling us?
I said, dearly beloved brothers and sisters and everybody else, today we are gathered here to see what kind of truths we can discuss.
I love it. And I wish we could always open so beautifully, but we do not have the language to do so normally. Anyway, hey all, welcome back to the show. This is That's So Fucked Up, a podcast about cults, crimes, and other things that make you say, ugh, that's so fucked up. I'm your host for today, flying solo, Fallon Morey. And today I'm joined by Mary Byler. They are the CEO, is that the right term? CEO of the Misfit-Amish. And the Misfit-Amish is a podcast and
an organization that is a collective group of people working to bridge cultural gaps between plain Anabaptists and dominant culture.
Excellent. What Mary just said, the Misfit-Amish was about. There's also a Misfit-Amish podcast. Mary is also a published author. Their book is titled Reflections and Memories of an Amish Misfit. And there is a tagline. My therapist says that's not true, but I digress. So I have to know. I don't think I've ever seen a bright tagline on a book before. So where did that tagline come from?
Well, you know, when I escaped, it was really difficult to assimilate into dominant culture because the culture that I grew up in, while I grew up in America, I was born in Amish America. When I escaped, I didn't have a birth certificate. I didn't have a social security card. Like, I had an 8th grade education because that was legitimized by Wisconsin versus Yoder, which allowed and legitimized in the name of religious freedom, child labor trafficking of Amish children in lieu of the same education as their peers. And Wisconsin versus Yoder is widely hailed by many people who use homeschooling.
Yes.
All of that, right?
And outside of Amish culture as well, in any...
Right. But the truth of it is, the reality of it is that court ruling from 1972, which is over 50 years old now, legitimized child labor trafficking in lieu of education beyond the 8th grade. And part of what that does, like, I didn't know I could open a bank account without a man on it until somebody told me I could.
Wow.
And this was in 2004.
Oh my gosh.
So assimilating made me feel like I was a misfit. I didn't fit in. I don't fit in. You know, if I talk about the sin sifter, people call our head coverings all bonnets. They're not. What I'm wearing right now, as jokes, me and my friends call them sin sifters. But part of that is like this is called a koptuch. And while we call it a sin sifter as a joke, the correct term for it is a headscarf. We have another covering that's called a cup. That is not the same thing as a bonnet. And while I know things like that, while I can pick out potentially what Amish settlement or what type of plane you are by the way you are dressed, I'm pop culturally illiterate. And it makes me feel like, you know, I'm just kind of not really, like, I'm a misfit. I don't quite fit in.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And just for our listeners, since unfortunately they can't see us, what Mary's referring to is they're wearing on their head a headscarf. That's the right word? A red colored headscarf.
It's kind of burgundy, but it's like, it's like a see-through voile type of material.
Oh, okay.
We were not allowed to have them made out of this type of material, nor were we allowed to have them red in any of the settlements I lived in, and I lived in 5 different settlements.
Interesting. So that is really just, you know, being an absolute rebel.
Well, they called me rebellious. I had to show them what rebellious really looks like.
Which takes a lot of strength. I remember reading in your book about holding fabrics up to the light to see if they were opaque enough. And so I guess that would fall under the same rules. That does not pass the test in any light. Dark or light, that would not pass the test.
That would not pass the test.
Not at all. So welcome. I'm so glad that you're able to join us today. I mentioned to Mary before we started, I grew up in Pennsylvania, and there are a lot of pretty big Amish presence in Pennsylvania where I'm from, but I know shockingly little about the Amish, not as much as I'd like to know. And I wondered if we could, well, before we get started, is there anything you'd like to kind of kick us off with? Anything you'd like to tell us about yourself before we just jump right in, or should we just jump right in?
Well, here's the thing, is that to begin having this conversation, I feel like your listeners are going to need a background of like what it means to be Amish. That's one. And they're going to need overall kind of structure of authority within most Amish settlements.
Yes, I think that's a great place to start.
What it means to be Amish. So here's the thing. First, during the Reformation movement, Menno Simmons and his followers, they started what's known now formally as the Mennonite Church. There are many different types of Mennonites. Not all of them are plain. Some of them are assimilated. Some of them or institutionalized. We used to call them the liberal Mennonites, but they're still Anabaptists. That you wouldn't know that they're Mennonites based on the way they dress or their mode of transportation.
I'm sorry. Does assimilated mean more assimilated into
dominant culture? And then you have like plain Mennonites. You have some Mennonites who may speak Plattdeutsch, or others may speak Pennsylvania Dutch, like kind of like we do, but it's a dialect. And you even have horse and buggy Mennonites. Regardless, there's a variety. There's a whole plethora of plain people out there. And just because you see somebody plain does not mean that they're Amish.
Right.
So please consider that before you just see somebody plain and you just think they're Amish. And just because somebody plain is selling Amish goods also does not mean they're necessarily Amish. But the Amish split from the Mennonites in the late 1600s, largely because of the shunning policy. Okay. The Mennonites did not practice the shunning policy godly enough. It wasn't right.
Okay.
That's how we got started, because Jacob Ammon and his followers just said it wasn't right. And for almost 400 years, we have been intermarrying our second and third, fourth and fifth and sixth cousins to the point that we have our own genetic disorder. It is an ethnocentric religion, but it is not just a religion. It's a different culture. And it's also a business. And branding
Interesting.
is amazing when you consider the $2.4 billion tourism industry annually in Lancaster County, PA alone. Furthermore, media of all sorts and types. Y'all gonna need to grab onto your hats and bonnets and hold on. You might even need a brandy old fashioned. I'm just saying. You might need something, because this is gonna be a one wild ride for you to digest everything that I'm about to tell you. There's the Amish romance novel industry, which I believe is estimated to be worth approximately $1.4 billion annually.
Wow.
Who reads those novels?
I do not read those novels, and I would guess that they are not being written by anyone who is Amish or ex-Amish.
The majority of them? No.
No.
There are some that are written by people of some kind of Amish background, like Beverly Lewis is a very popular one, I believe. What she did is she wrote about Amish women in ways that is inaccurate and inappropriate, and she also wrote about Amish theology that in ways that just doesn't mesh. It doesn't actually compute. Like, it's not correct, because Amish are not evangelical. Typically, we do not recruit members.
Right.
We don't go seek out people to join our pews. We don't pretend that, oh, we're better than the world. Like, there's even sermons that I've heard from Amish that legitimately say, oh, well, we don't get to say that people out there in the world aren't going to make it to heaven, But here's the caveat. If you are born Amish, you are given a covenant, a gift. And if you go out into the world like I did, you're taking that covenant and stepping on it.
Yeah, so there's always that, like, a little bit of a threat of, we can't say everyone out there is going to hell or, ruining their lives, but if you leave, you're ruining the covenant and you're...
Right. But also, we don't believe in absolution of salvation. We can only hope. And it is a privilege, it is a covenant, it is a gift to be born into the church. This is your heritage, your birthright. You are given this. So there's that. What does it mean? Well, it means that even though I escaped 20 years ago, I don't feel comfortable saying ex-Amish at this point in my life, because if I said ex, what does that mean about the genetic effects?
Right.
And if you want more information on that, there's a genetic disorder database on the NIMH library.
Wow.
Also, there's the Young Center for Anabaptist Studies that I highly disagree with. And I highly disagree with it because, in my opinion, they have elevated the voices of the most privileged within Amish communities. And to fully understand how that works, you have to understand that you will have different settlements, which are geographically different, okay? That's one. Rules may vary between different settlements, but also within a settlement, you may have different types of churches. Rules may vary between different types of churches. If you have an Old Order Amish church versus a New Order Amish church, or a Troyer church, or a Swartzentrooper church, or a Dan Me, then at that point, they're all going to have their own set of rules. However, typically twice a year, the ministry of that specific type of Amish will gather together. They will have a conference where they rewrite the rules to address things that need to be addressed. And then if they have more than one church district, that's going to be entailing, if they have 14 church districts, it's like 14 times 4. They all get together and they decide what's going to be written there. And then each home church district ministry takes what they discussed at this conference and they take it back to the home church and they rewrite what they call the Ordnungsbrief, which is the rules letter. Then they read it to the church takes a vote. And
wow.
I was taught that in order for me to vote, I had to vote the same way as my stepfather. And when I get married, I have to vote the same way as my husband.
Right, of course.
So was it really a vote? So rules may vary even within the same type of Amish with different church districts just because of the decentralized leadership. And then, even then, the family can always add to it. It's kind of like when I was in the military and it's like you can always add to it, but you can't take away.
Right. You were in the military. I was also in the military.
Oh, yeah.
For a little while.
So you know what I'm talking about when I say you can add to it, but you can't take away.
Right.
It's a perfect way to describe that.
Absolutely. So a settlement then, is that generally over just a larger geographic area, or does that refer to, a larger group of churches that follow generally one sort of?
No, it's geographically located.
Okay. And I noticed that, your book was broken down into the settlements that you lived in, correct? The different places that you lived throughout your experience.
You want to hear the most ridiculous rule I ever heard?
Absolutely.
That they made when they rewrote the Ordnungsbrief?
Sure.
They outlawed green buggy seats.
Green buggy, like the upholstery color, or like the color they're made of? For what reason?
Is there really a reason? This is, again, like all the ministry is going to be men. They believe in the headship principles, usually. Like I was also taught, when you get married, you have to do whatever your husband says, whenever he says, and that means inside the bedroom and out. Person. Oh.
I know we've heard that when we've talked to, different people from different groups outside, obviously, of the Amish, but the same concept of creating rules that are just for people to follow, or like a test of, or just a show of, this might be ridiculous, but I'm doing it because I can, or because I'm in charge, sort of thing.
Yeah, because it goes back to this whole thing when you have some Amish bishops really like to play God. Oh, and let me also say this, is sometimes there are certain types of Amish that they will have a settlement, will have a somewhat senior bishop for the settlement or for the type of Amish, sometimes. But this one, we lived in a very small settlement. There was one bishop, that was it. He was the end all be all.
Right.
And I'm going to read from a newspaper article from April 10, 2004. It was published in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, because I always marvel at these rules and this type of affair, because you're talking about these arbitrary rules.
Right.
But what he said, our people are taking this very seriously. Johnny Byler did not hesitate to tell us the mistakes he made, but we're going to wait until we think it's the right time to ask the church to forgive him. Why are we calling it mistakes instead of crimes? These were felonies. He is a registered sex offender to this day.
Right. That's an absolute rewrite of what it actually is by a person in the supreme authority.
You nailed it. And why would he do that? Because it benefits him to do so, because you have to protect the money. It always goes back to the money. And then later on in the article, Bishop Miller wonders why his church cannot have control in dealing with the Bylers and Kempfs.
When he says why they can't have control, is he suggesting like no outside the Amish criminal authority, basically like we'll take care of it on our own?
Yes, that is exactly what he is suggesting.
Wow.
Earlier in the same article, this is from my incubator. The Amish community has its own way of punishing people, said Byler's mother, Sally Kemp. We've settled this ourselves.
Settled it how? Oh my gosh.
Because, there's always got to be the enforcers. When you have patriarchal authoritarian control and high control like that, you always have the people who are the enforcers. She was an enforcer.
An enforcer just being, in this case, in this or in your community, like someone who talked to the person who was committing the offense or tried to keep it away from being known to the public or some other.
She's the one. Some people benefit from proximity to power within high control groups, high control religious groups for sure. And especially if it's authoritarian, you will often see that there are women who will enforce. That is why, we would see things like going to a quilting. Sometimes you would have women who would walk out with a yardstick to measure the length of other women's dresses because our dresses were supposed to be a certain length.
Oh my gosh.
And then you have the people who report your supposed crimes because your shot span, your apron string was a quarter of an inch too wide, or the folds in your dress were,
wow,
maybe an eighth of an inch too narrow.
So literally, if you are a woman or, assigned female at birth in an Amish community, you have no sense, I'm guessing, even as you get older, that anything is really safe. Like you don't have the safety of women counterparts and you don't have the safety of anyone.
You may not have that. I will say this is when I say she was an enforcer, I also saw my grandmother who was somebody who made an Amish bishop cry. She was 4'11", like that. I mean, I spent most of my childhood hearing how I'm just like her, so I digress. So that's, regardless. She wasn't necessarily looked at as a good Amish woman by the people like my own oven, my own mother, who were we're the enforcers. We're good. We're godly. We are being the good Amish woman.
So that concept of the good Amish woman and what makes that.
You have to submit to God's authority, to your husband, to the ministry, to everybody. Your voice is probably given to you by the men in charge of you. And this is part of why I talk about men, and especially Amish-raised men. They don't have the capacity or the perspective to be speaking about the issues that Amish-raised women and AFAB people experience because they lack that perspective.
Right.
They were groomed to be the leaders of the home. Mm-hmm. We were groomed to be the trad wives, barefoot and pregnant, have as many babies as possible, and if you happen to die in childbirth, well, that was God's will. And it was holy.
And that's a message you're getting from when you're very, very young, I'm guessing. Not...
You're born into it.
Right.
You hear it.
And you know what is coming in the future, basically.
Yes. I've often likened it to, I felt like I was being told what to wear, how to make what to wear, right down to an eighth of an inch.
Right.
Or a 16th of an inch sometimes. How to walk, how to talk, what my body language should be.
Wow.
What tone of voice I should use, how I should laugh.
And I think I remember in your book, your mother saying at one point you were saying that you were going to laugh to sort of get through it or laugh because that's all you could do. And she was just saying don't laugh or don't laugh too much.
Don't laugh too much. Don't laugh too loud. Don't,
No joy.
What is joy?
What is joy?
What is joy? And I felt like I was also told what brings me value and worth in the world.
Right.
And what I was groomed to believe that would bring me value and worth in the world was, what do you think it was? You've read the book.
Being good Amish seemed to be a recurring theme is if I do this right, if I am a good Amish person, if I do everything correctly, like that will it eventually change? Will it eventually get better? That was a huge thing I took out of it, but maybe that wasn't the most important.
Well, if I just had enough faith, enough prayer, enough compliance,
Right.
enough conformity,
Right.
and enough submission to the men in charge of me, nothing bad would ever happen to me, right?
And so then it reinforces that message that if the bad does happen, that it is because you're not compliant enough, obeying enough, etc.
Your dress is too short or too long.
Too long. How could too long be a problem?
This master's too eng, okay? It's too narrow.
Like too form-fitting.
It gives too much. It doesn't translate properly.
No, it's okay. I love it because it gives, it's just like there's always this, and we were talking about it earlier, but there's always this control or always this sort of scrutiny over the bodies of people that are
women or AFAB people.
Yes.
And especially children. Even in dominant culture, that is a reoccurring theme. You see it in schools with the regulations or policies that schools make that are, gender specifically targeting and sexualizing women and AFAB children's bodies.
Of course. I remember in like a mainstream elementary school and high school, if you're a woman, a guy could come in a muscle shirt tank top and it was fine. But if you're a woman or AFAB, you have to, presenting as a woman, you have to have a tank top that's like 3 finger widths apart, or your skirt has to reach below your hands when they're down at your sides. And they will send you home and make you miss education for something like that. I had never seen a man get sent home for any clothing violation, or a boy, I should say, not a man at that age, a boy.
Yeah, we see it in workplace policies.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
We see it in the ways that society at large responds to people, like when victims of MST, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but military sexual trauma come forward. Do you know who I think her name was Vanessa Williams, but her name was Vanessa, and she was brutally murdered by the guy that she was it was the armorer.
Yes, on a military base. And they found her body, I think, later.
Mm-hmm. In Texas.
Yes.
They found her body later. Yes. And so, I bring up Vanessa because there are so many people whom I personally know who have experienced that kind of sexual trauma, not even necessarily in the military, but within organizations and institutions. And when they try to seek some form of justice or safety or resources for themselves, this is what happens. They basically end up receiving no form of justice. And if there is justice, it's a slap on the wrist.
Right.
Like Brock Turner, for example.
Ugh.
Everybody should know about that. And there's this whole narrative about, oh, he's a good boy. He just messed up. Oh, he's a good man. He just made a mistake. There's the same rewriting. It's a story, it's so pervasive and insidious around, literally around the world. It's not just one group of people.
Right. I can speak to being in the military, and, we do these trainings every year, and they're supposed to be, the program changes names, but, at one point, sexual assault victim intervention basically was the name for a while. And we would have trainings to teach you how to deal with if somebody comes to you and wants to talk about what's happened to them, or they want to report it to you, or they want to report it restricted, which basically means they don't want their name in anything because they're afraid for their safety or, whatever. And the people in the training are going, well, I'm not trying to blame a victim, of course, but you should also look at the way these girls go out dressed, and you should look at how many beers they have, and they don't go out dressed at the bar with all their fellow sailors because, they want to be left alone all night. And I'd have to jump in every time and be like, are you kidding me? You are literally saying that regardless of what happens, it's based on something like how somebody was dressed and not at all the will of the other person. And I feel like that's just one snapshot, like you said, across any other industry or group of people.
It happens. It happens in academia. It happens within businesses. It happens within religious groups. Like, it exists within groups of people around the world. Let's just be real about that.
I guess I never would have imagined before, really, well, reading your book and looking into the Amish a little bit more, I would have never thought that that same sort of fetishization of those bodies or the restrictions or the dress happened to that degree within that community. So it was super eye-opening.
Do you want to hear some more?
Always.
Let me give you some more tea about the fetishization of plain dressing women. I have literally had people who came into my live stream who requested to have a conversation because I was on TikTok, okay? They requested to have a conversation and they come up and they say something about, oh, the good Amish bread. And it's like, okay, well, you know, I'm saying maybe you should consider reading my book before you just come up here and you say this.
Right.
And this person says, I'm not going to read your book. Of course it was a man.
Of course.
Of course it was. He says, I'm not going to read your book. So I said, okay, maybe you don't read. Let me give you another opportunity for education. Please go watch Sins of the Amish. Please. And this person says, oh, I watched Sins of the Amish on Pornhub.
What?
Furthermore, I've had podcast guests who dressed plain, and after they escaped and got out of the plain lifestyle and they started dressing like normal people, they had intimate partners who asked them to dress up in their plain garb because there are so many men who prey on plain women.
Wow. From outside the community.
From external to the communities.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
We are nothing but fetishized objects to them. In fact, today I had somebody ask me, do you just have a Amish bonnet lying around that you can put on for me?
Oh, gross.
And another common one is, well, can you speak your language for me? Why do you expect people to perform on task for you?
Right.
We don't owe you our energy.
Of course.
We don't owe you that mental labor. And furthermore, I'm not here for your gratification. So, I mean, educate yourself or don't. I'm putting the information out there. And if you don't educate yourself, that's a you problem.
Right. Oh my gosh. I can't imagine just like how that audacity fits into one human skeleton, like that much audacity.
I just feel like the pockets are not big enough.
Right. Like,
and then I'm like, but have you worn men's jeans? They have such big pockets. I could put a book in them.
Right. That's what it is. It's because they have all those pockets that we so desire on our pants. Oh my God.
Anyways.
That's kind of unbelievable. So one thing I think you mentioned that I did want to touch on was, I think we started to talk about it, but the difference of being Amish actually looks like versus in the popular narrative. And so I think everyone in pop culture sees Amish as this kind of one monolithic figure, like a woman in a solid color dress with what they call a bonnet. It's not the right terminology, and an apron. But I know that's not indicative of what Amish really means. And I'm sure that you've dealt with this misconception forever. So,
you know, my loved ones have asked me to never watch Amish reality TV ever again. I have no idea why.
Are those like the ones that they used to do about like breaking Amish or whatever? Like the...
Yes, Breaking Amish, Amish Mafia, Return to Amish, like all of these shows. Like there's, I mean, like over and over and over, it's like half-truths mixed with complete blatant misinformation.
Right, right. So are there any particularly big ones that like big misconceptions that you would want to kind of bring up to us and kind of, I guess, put to bed?
Well, 1, I lived in 5 different settlements. 2, we didn't call it Rumspringen. We said we went with the young folks. 3, we did not get to go live English. 4, even when, and if you read my book, I was all decked out in my sin sifter and my plain Amish dress on my knees like a good person. I was going to say like a good girl. Anyways.
like a good person.
Confessing my sins in front of the entire church in
Yes.
some kind of ritualistic, whatever, form of accountability. But I want to also let all of you know that whenever, that perpetrator that we were talking about, the church is going to have him ask for forgiveness, that's the same ritual that they would have him do. I just want to point that
And
out.
to be clear, you're asking for forgiveness, if I remember correctly, was attending a party, drinking beer, and smoking, right? And being accused of wearing pants.
Yes.
So you being accused of wearing pants is on par for them with somebody like sexually assaulting someone.
And not just so, not even adults, children, sexually assaulting
I
children.
woefully understated that, but like I'm just,
But like,
it's just absolutely mind blowing.
well, that is so fucked up.
It
I'm
is
just
so
saying.
fucked up. We could drop that mic right here. I think there's probably 15 things you've already said that we could drop the mic on. I think that's probably the one thing that every single person out there will probably want to know about is going with the young people, not Rumspringa.
Okay. Yeah. Well, going with the young folks. So, like, and I'm not even saying, like, here's the thing. There's some settlements that do practice Rumspringa, but even that, it's not what the world thinks it is.
Right. Where you just like, okay, bye, I'm going to leave for a few years and get tattoos and pierce my nipples and I'll be back. Like,
I have a question.
Yes.
If you are taught your entire life that the world is bad or filled with evil, and there's all this sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and driving cars, and you go out and you experience those things with that same mindset, is that the only thing that dominant culture people are capable of?
no. But yeah,
Is it really living English to go out and party?
right. No. It's an extremely limited view on either side. But yeah, definitely. I imagine there's probably also some fear associated with that. If you are able to, as you would call it, live English for any period of time, like you've just been told that, your whole life, as you've mentioned, that it's bad, there's sin. And then somebody opens the door and says, but like, okay, but go ahead. Like, I wouldn't want to go out there. I'd be like, no thanks. But I don't know,
Well,
maybe.
it's called fear-mongering.
What is that?
It's called fear-mongering. When you fear-monger, you're putting out all of this misinformation about a group of people. It's the us versus them mentality. It's the moral superiority. Ours is moral superiority with the twist. Because we don't recruit people, right?
Superiority with extras.
We have extra twists to navigate.
Right.
And it's also like this thing of like, we used Lutheran High German Bibles. We weren't allowed to read the Bible in English. Like, technically, I learned my primary language was Pennsylvania German or Dutch, and my secondary language was English. And then when I was in 4th grade, I learned High German, which is still different from Pennsylvania German.
Right. And different than probably popular spoken in Europe German as well.
Yes. I actually lived in Germany for 5 years. And yes, it is still different.
Wow.
So, to really, really get down to the gist of it, when you understand that the fear-mongering is so complete, because who controls the education?
The church, or not the church, but the
We have steering committees in some settlements. We have the school board in other settlements. And then, of course, the qualifications to be a teacher. If you went to Amish 8th grade and, perhaps some teachers, they might have a good dress, or they might come from a good family. Some teachers are minors, believe it or not.
Interesting. That just made me think of the part of your book where you were talking about your Amish dentist, the education level, and your Amish dentist had an 8th grade education level and gave you horse Novocaine or something?
Cow Novocaine.
Cow Novocaine, I'm sorry. But I was just like that. But I didn't mean to interrupt about the school, but I mean on the same. So there is nobody necessarily in the school that is chosen for every position because of their professional ability or their actual knowledge in a lot of cases.
So who monitors the curriculum? the school board who answers to the ministry. So when you control access to information, you can easily control people.
Oh, absolutely. Is the ministry across settlements different in structure? Does it all tend to go to sort of roll up to one person at the top of each structure, or is it different?
So every settlement I've ever known, it's the bishop, like the church district is going to be, like first you have the settlements that might have the senior bishop of the type of Amish, right?
Okay.
And then you would have like the church district's ministry, which is going to be the bishop, the ministers, and the deacon usually. Now I do know that there are some New Order Amish churches that don't have deacons, but typically Old Order Amish churches or the more conservative Amish churches will have deacons.
And I know that frequently in many other religions where it's very high control or, and these are evangelical religions in many cases, everyone is sort of expected to be part of the church. Like many people within the particular group or church serve a position within the church, like a board or sometimes a deacon or one of the education committee. So is it like that in the Amish community? Does everyone have like a role within the church, or is the church very separate?
I wouldn't say it is. You're expected to, like, one of the things that I've found very interesting is the difference. They're like having all of these committees and these additional, like, going and doing all of this. Like, we only had church every 2 weeks.
I did read that, which surprised me.
Like, we didn't do Bible study, except like sometimes family Bible study on the in-between Sundays.
Right. But probably very much a part of everyday life, talking about God and sin and,
Well, it was God's will.
Right.
It was just God's will, Maybe it's God's will that we're here having this conversation, if he exists.
Maybe.
Oops. When you create environments where there's such a high intensive labor component, when do people have the time to participate in even processing or, managing what their experiences have been?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question that comes up again and again when you talk about so many very controlling groups, especially those that are very patriarchal. And from when I was reading, it felt like on every page you were talking about this massive amount of work you were doing from the time you were very small, every day, all the time. And sometimes you were like, well, I finished so I can go write in my journal. And then somebody would come in the house and be like, no, you actually have to do my work now, like stack firewood or whatever. And do you think that's purposefully done to keep people busy or?
Idle hands are the devil's workshop.
Then absolutely my house all the time right now is the devil's workshop.
My house is the devil's workshop too. It's okay though, I've accepted it. I think we should make reservations. Although I have to wonder, no. I don't know. I feel like some people really are afraid of the things I might say about.
Oh, in the Amish community or outside? Both?
There's some good coffee.
That's look at it. Yeah, it's dark out. I got you. So I guess, and if you're not comfortable talking about this, we can redirect, but I wanted to ask sort of in your process of leaving, was there one particular thing that you felt really made you make that decision? Or was it sort of because it had built for so long with the things that had happened to you? Because it's always sort of been interesting to me when I do see accounts on social media from people who they call themselves ex-Amish or, are talking about formerly being part of an Amish community. And sometimes they talk a little bit about what made them leave, but I'm sure it's very different for everyone.
Well, you read my book. It wasn't just as easy as leaving.
No, not at all. I know that you went through so much, and I didn't know if there was sort of like an event on one particular day that was like, for you, was like, that's it.
Yeah, I would actually call it escaping.
Escaping.
Let's call it what it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
But how I escaped and what made me escape was the realization of, like, I have siblings who are loved ones, and there was a series of events that led to me realizing that no matter what I did, I could not keep them safe. I could not keep it from having them.
Right.
It's also the same reason why I had to, because I couldn't live with myself knowing that I know all of these things and I have done nothing.
Right.
But I will say that part of the backdrop of that is like unpacking, throughout the last 20 years, I've been unpacking a lot of things. And one of those things was unpacking the fact that probably about 3 weeks before I escaped, my mother told me the most delightful advice, So that whole thing where I'm supposed to grow up to be a good Amish wife and get married and have as many children as humanly possible while I'm cooking and cleaning and raising the children and sewing and gardening and preserving food and baking and cooking and, all the things.
Never stopping.
Never stopping. Never stopping. But in addition, the incident where she was telling me that when I get married, I have to do whatever my husband says, whenever he says, and that means inside the bedroom and out. And that coming on the heels of watching a 17-year-old confess in church that they enticed an adult in their mid-20s to sexually abuse them, as well as a middle-aged woman who had given birth to at least 14 children confessing in church that she had sinned greatly by not upholding her marriage bed properly. And my question was, how?
Yeah, wow.
How? And I think those were incidents that led to me realizing and recognizing that this is not working. Something is not right. The people who are managing this are not qualified. They don't have the tools or the resources to actually manage offenders of sexual crimes.
Right. Because as you mentioned before in that article, that bishop sounds very incredulous. Like, I really don't get it. Like, why can't we just deal with it?
Oh, even better. Even better. There's an additional article from July 19, 2004, where that same bishop, Dan Miller, the Byler's Amish bishop, acknowledged to the Star Tribune that stories of sexual assault of Amish children in Vernon County may have circulated long before he received a letter from the 20-year-old victim detailing the abuse she suffered.
I just, I want to respond, but I'm like angry and speechless. I spent today rereading chunks of the book that I had kind of read before, and I've had my head sort of immersed in your book all day, and I cried and I was so angry. I wanted to throw my iPad against the wall, but I didn't because it's expensive. But if I had had a paper copy, it would have been on that wall so many times.
Hey, guess what? You can buy an autographed copy of my TikTok shop.
You know what? I probably have to, but I don't want to throw an autographed copy, but just...
And I'm in the process of making a swag edition. It'll have bookmarks of me and my being a godless heathen.
Nice. I think you should put as many of those pictures out into the world as you want to.
I'm really sinning over here.
You are. What did you call that? The dress? Your prideful dress, right?
This is my prideful dress.
Your prideful dress.
I made this dress to go to prom.
That's awesome.
I went to prom as a 38-year-old person. Wait, hold up. 39. I was 39 and I finally made it to prom.
Nice.
But also, I wanted to be just, this is me. I'm not going to be apologetic for making a dress based off the dress style that I would have been required to wear in the last settlement that I lived in.
Of course. Something I loved reading seeing at the end of the book, especially, but also throughout the book, you showed a picture of the baptism dress, I believe, that you were making, and then a quilt you had done, which was so beautiful. I have quilted on a couple of occasions, but it always comes out crooked. And today you're crocheting and you clearly made your dress. So is crafting and creating like that something that you carried with you that still gives you a lot of comfort or joy, or is it just old habits or...
Well, I think that I also do paintings, by the way. And I think that there are things that some people experience in the world that are indescribable. They are the unspeakable things, the things that hide in the darkness of night, and the things that come up when you close your eyes and you try to go to sleep and you can't go to sleep. But when you experience those things and you don't have the words to describe what you experience, which you actually can do, even if you don't have words, when you create things that you find joy in, or that you find cathartic, something to give you an outlet, because you have to find a way to let it out. You have to find a way to process it, even if it is unspeakable.
Right.
And people find that in various ways. Some people write, some people create, some people paint, some people, they go to rage rooms.
Oh,
where they
you
smash
can like
things.
break an old refrigerator with a baseball bat or a sledgehammer or whatever, right? I would love to do that.
I'm just saying, I highly recommend like seeking out outlets for you to actually be able to process. If you have experienced trauma, you need to have an outlet, because if you don't process it, it will come up in ways that you do not want it to come out.
That's so powerful. Like creating something out of literally nothing to process what you can't always put into words, which I think is so beautiful. And it's such a stark contrast to me that the things that I've seen in your pictures that come out of processing all of that rage or grief or all those things is so beautiful on the other side. Like it transforms as it comes out the other side, which is just...
But that's part of trauma recovery. When you've experienced so much trauma, if you experience childhood trauma, it arrests development, like repetitive childhood trauma arrests development.
Right.
There's also this thing where you can be genetically predisposed to have PTSD. I myself live with complex and chronic PTSD. But part of trauma recovery, an essential part of it, is actually learning to live with joy. And one of the most difficult things for me, I can sit here and crack jokes all day about the Amish men who tell me I'm trash talking to Amish, because you know what? You're the reason.
Yeah.
You're the reason. Anyway. But you know what? When my neighbor came over and said thank you for something that I had done, I cried.
Aww.
When people show me kindness, it's harder to navigate that than it is to navigate the vitriol that sometimes people spew at me. When people tell me I'm going to hell,
Just like, all right.
at least I won't be seeing you there.
Since you're so pious, looks like I don't have to have this conversation again.
I'm so glad you're on your glass pedestal over there. Enjoy it.
I'll just be over here in hell, do my thing.
I mean, I already survived hell. I just feel like I can level up if I have to level up.
I saw a sign once, and this has nothing to do with being Amish, but I saw a sign once and somebody's like, it was like a list of people going to hell, and it was like women in yoga pants, masturbators, drug dealers, people who take naps. It was like a list of 6 or 7 like absolutely ridiculous thing, and all my friends and I were just like, all right, see you in hell. Like, it's gonna be lit.
Hell's gonna be great.
All the coolest people will be there, according to some.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I won't see you there. Anyways, I'm saying like the people who tell me I'm going to hell.
Right.
Enjoy that.
But yeah, but that's almost easier to deal with, you're saying, than sometimes the...
Oh, no, I'm not saying almost. I'm saying that is easier to
okay.
deal with.
Not almost. Absolutely easier to deal with. I got you.
Because part of trauma recovery is finding ways, accepting that you're able to handle positive emotions or even receive feedback that is positive towards you. And I will say this, my day job that pays my bills keeps a roof over my head, food in my cupboards, especially with the food insecurity issues. But we're not going to go there. I digress. But my day job is a job that kind of gave me feedback hey, you're really good at this part. You're really good at this. And that was part of learning to accept that. I've had partners who, they're oh, you're really good at this. Oh, you know what? I don't even like baked goods, but when you make baked goods, I'll eat them because they don't they're actually good. They don't have that nasty aftertaste. Well, yeah, my family's been baking for, multiple generations. We have been baking. We are bakers.
And I wonder, I guess I would have to ask, if you're so not used to receiving that positive reinforcement from anything, it must feel very untrustworthy when you start to receive it.
Oh, yes. That's part of why trauma recovery is okay.
This isn't real.
And then the other part is trauma recovery also is to teach you to be in touch with your actual body and to be present in the here and the now.
Right.
How do you reorient to the present here and now when you've had activating events like flashbacks and night terrors and triggers in your whole body, your whole nervous system, your central nervous system has decided to shut down and be like, duh, you're over here. How do you reorient to the present moment and the present day and time?
Interesting. I have not personally done any sort of trauma work myself. Like I have not gone through any, I would say, significant trauma that I've been treated for. So you'll have to forgive me at being my lack of knowledge, but it's this is so fascinating to me. I was going to ask if the decision to write your book, if that was also, I'm guessing, some part of your trauma recovery, or you just, at some point, you just needed to get it out.
Do you want to know why I wrote my book?
I'd love to. It's a great book.
Let me untangle my yarn and I'll tell you.
Oh.
So anyway, why did I write my book? Well, when people have sat there for over 15 years and reporters and researchers have written and published articles about you where they're using your trauma for their own benefit and gain, and they're only telling the stories that they want to tell, and they're only talking about the things that they want to talk about. Because up until I published my book and I started the podcast that I host, there wasn't a lot out there where people actually talked about my grandmother, or they talked about my uncle who taught me how to draw, or they talked about, my grandmother's beating, or just so many different things and people and animals that kept me alive, because there were people that I genuinely love and that I genuinely care about. And there are still people inside of Amish communities and homes. I have loved ones, people that I love, that are still there. And so it was important to me, after yet another reporter made up literally made up things that I had never said and published it. And when that article came out, that's when I was like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
Let me set the record straight.
Right.
Let me tell you what I gotta say. And I didn't even go to a publisher because I wanted my book to be written from the perspective of what it's like to experience trauma as a child, what it's like to live with the way that trauma memories resurface, what it's like to actually be in Amish America versus dominant culture America, and what it's like to speak a different first language in America.
That's something I noticed. I think I already mentioned, you're very clear at the beginning of your book that you are going to tell the things you are ready to tell and that you want to tell. And you're very clear with the boundary of, I'm not going to talk about that right now because maybe later I'll be ready to talk about that, but I'm not. But I did notice how you sort of we get these pockets of stories and moments and like phases of your life kind of one by one. And that probably corresponds to what you just said, which is how things surface for you as someone reliving trauma, which is probably what made it so powerful. Definitely one of the things that made it so powerful. And I loved reading those beautiful moments where you're talking about your grandmother and the beads and how fast she drops these beads onto the necklaces and stuff, like how fast she was at beading, because every time I've ever tried to bead anything, I've dropped them everywhere and sworn a whole bunch. So I just don't do that anymore. And then was it your person you called, is it Momi? Is that your grandmother?
Mommy, that's my grandmother.
That's your grandmother. Okay. Yelling at someone in church, yelling at a man in church.
She made the bishop cry she was 4'11". I'm just saying, my grandma was somebody to be reckoned with.
I guess. So it must be an honor to be compared with. And then also your dog, which made me really sad.
But then also my brother Moses, my brothers who had disabilities. Just, again, this is me setting the record straight.
Right. And we can shy away from this topic too if you don't want to answer, but you did write about your brothers with disabilities. And, I'm wondering if in general within the Amish community, how do they treat people who are disabled or, neurodivergent or anything? Is it ignored? It seemed like some things were very completely ignored or not given the treatment they deserved. And I was just wondering, is that kind of how it is for everyone that's not?
Did you like the Amish doctor who had a nail clipper?
With your body will tell it which way to go for what medicines you should take, and taking vitamins that made you dizzy. I was, yes, that's
delightful, right?
Right.
I'm not going to speak for like overall in general. I would just say that the things that I saw people do to my brothers who had disabilities were horrendous. I'm sure there's, and I actually know there's disabilities. There's people who live with disabilities that have different experiences, however come pause. For me, it is very traumatic. Not even traumatic. It is I have a lot of grief over my brothers. I don't think we really need to go in depth with that right now. I don't think that's the right place for me to go.
No, that's fine. That's totally fine. Is there any areas you want us to get into that we haven't touched on yet? Those were some, and there's so many.
Do you remember the sacred subjects from the book? The little booklets?
Yes. And I saw that you talked about one in specific, but I was wondering what those were. Oh, you have them.
Oh, I'm nothing if not bring receipts.
Mary does bring receipts, like the actual things in triplicate, I think.
I'm looking for a specific one because it is the most horrendous and egregious one. But here's the problem is I use it frequently. So I don't know where it is right now.
It's probably under a pile, under a cup or something somewhere.
Oh, you know that whole like that neurodivergent thing of like when it's out of sight, it's out of mind.
Oh yeah, object permanence. It no longer exists because I put it in the other room.
Yes, that's me. It no longer exists because I put it on the pile of book. It no longer exists because I found it.
You did. Is that the 11? To a child of 11? Yes, that's the one you referenced.
To a girl of 11.
And that's the one you reference. Can you share what these books are or what these things are for our audience?
Let's go back to Rumspringa.
Sure.
If you do your part to dress and behave modestly and do not go out alone in public places, you need not have any great fears of men with evil intentions. Of course, you will want to pray to God to protect you at all times.
So much to unpack there. I mean, it's before anything happens, it's already your fault, and do your best, but also pray to God because, wow.
Yeah.
So are these books given out freely to Amish children or adolescent of different ages?
So these booklets are actually written by an Amish minister.
Okay.
They're published by an Amish publisher called Pathway Publishers.
Okay.
The minister has no name, but I'm pretty sure I know who wrote them. I am in possession of an advertisement in the Budget.
Oh,
The Budget is an Amish newspaper published weekly
interesting.
from 1985, advertising the sacred subjects.
Sacred subjects.
That now has grown to include 8 booklets. Those 8 booklets include things like, I wish I could have confided in my parents, ignorance is not bliss, to a girl of 11, to a boy of 12, before you begin courtship, before you marry, a guide for newlyweds, and for expectant parents.
Wow. So they have you all covered, pretty much.
Got me all covered. Whole life advice. And when they come in this little white box that they send it in, there's a sticker on it that says, do not open for parents only. Lift up the thumb tab to open. There's a lot of secrecy and silence. These are for parents, okay? Parents are supposed to use them as a guide, which the minister who wrote these gets more into. A note to parents. This booklet was written for parents. It is not suitable to be read by children or young people. Please be careful. It is not read by those for whom it is not intended. We strongly suggest that this booklet not only be kept in a concealed place where children will not be apt to come across it, but that you take measures to prevent their reading it in case they should come across it. Put this booklet inside a large brown envelope that can be sealed shut. Mark the envelope clearly that it is not to be opened. You will greatly reduce the temptation for a child or young person to read it without permission if he or she knows you will see the evidence that someone has been reading it.
Oh, I'm laughing because they're saying put it in a big secret looking envelope, mark secret, do not read this, and tell everyone how secret it is, and that'll make kids not want to read something. It's like life advice for how to make sure your kid wants to read it.
Well, and I just want to point out, like, people say there's no sex education within Amish communities, but we have the sacred subjects.
You have the sacred subjects, and I'm guessing it's either in before courtship or before getting married, somewhere around there. I am curious and you don't have to share, but I am curious as to what they tell the boys of 12.
Oh, I've recorded a whole book club conversation about To a Boy of 12. I think I've had 3 conversations about To a Boy of 12.
No, and we don't have to talk about it. I'm wondering if it's just more of that, like, I'm going to have to look
Well,
that up.
boys shouldn't have sex with animals. Farm boys, that's...
That's not what I expected to be into a boy of 12.
Also, there are evil men in the world who are homosexuals.
Oh, I saw a really funny picture on Facebook the other day, and it's in this group I'm in called the Feral Neurodivergent Meme Posting, and it's a picture of Satan like sewing a pride flag. And pretty much all the comments, my comment was like, nylon's terrible to sew. I'm glad Satan agreed to do it for us. But like, that just makes me think of, your comment made me think of that particular meme.
Yeah? Well, do you want to know why I feel like I need an apple pie now?
Why? Oh, God.
In the book like that, I wish I could have confided in my parents. I'm just going to read you a short paragraph. You can do with it as you please. You don't even have to put it in this episode. But I just need to read it to you.
Oh, yeah.
We must learn and we must teach our children that it is important to keep themselves pure and to flee useful lusts. But not the desire itself. Not the appetite is wrong, but the misuse of it. If I walk into a grocery store and start to eat an apple, it is wrong. So wrong that I could be punished by law for taking what is not mine. But once I have passed the checkout and paid for that apple, it is mine. I'm free to eat it, even enjoy it. My desire to eat that apple before it was mine was lust. My desire to eat it after it is rightfully mine is good and right, a sign of health and a means of keeping me healthy.
Oh, also so many levels to unpack. I've never felt like talking about apples has like made me feel so dirty before.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm just waiting for my kids to go into the grocery store with me and pick up a piece of fruit and be like, don't touch that. No lusting. You can eat it in the car.
Oh my.
That's safe.
So then going back to A Girl of 11, there are portions of this booklet that are absolutely horrendous, and they say things like, the sex urge, once it is awakened and active in a young boy at the age of puberty and beyond, can become a powerful driving force within him. He knows he should control his sexual desires, and he may want to very much. He may strive for purity, not only in actions, but also in his thought. Every decent girl who realizes this will do her best to help him and not make it harder for him. Even in your own home, if you have brothers in their teens, you should be mindful of this. Do not appear in their presence with night clothes that are scanty. Be modest about climbing up ladders. Be sure your dress stays closed in front, and when you sleep, either be sure your door is closed or you are properly closed or covered. Your brother innocently coming upon you and seeing your partly uncovered body may suddenly have strong sexual desires aroused within him. His intentions were not bad, but he suddenly finds himself the victim of your carelessness and the lusts of his own body. Although he may not bother you, and you may never be aware of the harm you did him, he may well be tempted to sins of personal impurity, which many boys wrestle with.
That's so much.
What is purity culture?
I mean, did you say what is purity culture? I'm still like reeling a little bit, having heard that and having read your book today. And what we talked about at the beginning, which was like this, of course, everything is the woman's fault. And especially going back to your appearance, absolutely everything is you being a temptation to that person. And the drive is never their fault. It's always your fault or the person's fault who is like, wearing the skimpy dress or the, God forbid, short sleeves, and that happens even like I think I said earlier when we were chatting, I'm on a tear like every prom season because there's always an article about some beautiful girl that they made go home because the teachers couldn't stop looking at her. And like, we should have left the girl at prom and taken the teachers out in handcuffs if that's the problem. Like, why is it, how is this possible? Like, how do people not see this? It's such a source of anger for me.
Why is it that when you say why is it that that we're not having the conversation, or we're not taking up the teachers in handcuffs. Rather, we are punishing children. When children are being sexualized and objectified by grown adults. Why is that? You know why it is? Because people legitimately find it beneficial to look the other way and pretend it doesn't exist and pretend it doesn't happen. Because as long as it doesn't affect them, and as long as they are the enforcers of this kind of rhetoric and garbage, BS, and thought processes that enable this to continue, they don't have to have the day of reckoning. They don't have to sit with the uncomfortableness of acknowledging that at some point they were part of an organization or an institution or a group of people that believed actual things that led to harming and sexual abuse of children being enabled and sexualization of children being enabled.
Yes.
They don't have to have that day of reckoning, and they also benefit from it. Sometimes it's financially, sometimes it's with prestige and power. Sometimes it's, I go back to my mother. Why was she doing what she did? Well, one, like she was an enabler. She was enforcing what it meant to be a good Amish woman.
Right.
And the belief is, if you do these things, then this won't happen to you. You are safe from them.
Right. And as we know,
sometimes it's a matter of survival. People participate in harmful systems and systemic oppression because it's a matter of survival, and because it allows them to live in cognitive dissonance and not actually acknowledge their own privilege.
Wow. Yes. And that's so interesting when you say it's a matter of survival, because I don't think I would ever really realize I would pair that word with it. I always think of it from the perspective of, like you said, like not having to acknowledge that dissonance of like, if I don't have to acknowledge that it's wrong that my male students and teachers are sexualizing children, it's easier for me to not deal with that problem. So it's like a point of comfort. Like I don't have to deal with it because I have the power to tell the girl, well, no, there's a rule. You can't have something that shows your curves of your body. At the end of the day, like you're just breaking a rule, but really you're breaking a rule that was established to keep me comfortable and to make sure that we don't upset the system that allows it to happen. It's just, and
it's
throw
pervasive.
This book at the wall. No. Just every book. There it is. Right. Throw those books at the wall for sure.
Oh, but I need them as evidence.
That's true.
So when I make an apple pie and I say I'm an apple pie today, I have evidence.
As long as you left the store with it first.
Here's the question, though. Is it rightfully mine if nobody... Never mind. I'll shut up.
So it's been great to talk to you. We've just been like yammering on for an hour and a half now, which has been so fun. And we've covered a lot. I know you've lived just this incredible life of determination and strength, obviously. Is there anything else you want to talk about? I definitely don't want to shortchange your story or anything you want to make sure we get out there.
No, I think maybe sometimes people need to ask themselves, where do they stand on the issue of child abuse? If they see something, are they saying something? Or are they sitting there and turning a blind eye? Even if it is a matter of survival, adults in the world have an obligation to provide safe communities for children to grow up in.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And it is a fundamental need to have safety.
Safety is not a luxury. I'm so glad you said that. Safety for a child should not be considered a luxury. It is a fundamental need for, as you know, growth and development and just life in general. Wow. I feel heavy. I'm happy that we got to talk today. Thank you so much for joining us. Where can we get a reminder of where people can find you if they want to listen to your podcast or check out your organization or read your book?
The-misfit-amish.com. There are links to all social media. You can buy autographed copies of my book on TikTok, and you can buy regular copies on Amazon.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. A happy Pride Month. We're recording this on June 1st. I don't know when it comes out. It could be August. because we live in a time machine when we record things. So, yeah, it was so great. Do you have any last things to say before we sign off for today?
You know, I think that if you have experienced some of the things that I've experienced or trauma of any sort, I want you to know that you are enough and you are never alone, even if you don't feel like you are enough or you are, with other people, because there are many different people out there in the world. There are 8 billion people out there in the world, and there are usually people out there somewhere that you can connect with and that are worth your time.
I love that. I don't even want to say any more to ruin that because that's such a beautiful sentiment. You're definitely enough. Thank you for reminding people of that and sharing your time with me today. I'm so appreciative of you. Just everything you've offered to people through publishing your book and talking to everyone that you talk to, and just grateful to have had you here. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. All right. Well, that's it for today, everyone. Again, we've been talking to Mary Byler, the-misfit-amish.com, and about her experiences, and we will see you next week.
Bum 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 bum. That's fucked up. I'm so fucked up. Can't you see? It's just really fucked. That's fucked up.